For the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, you just good.
All right, as far as amendments to the agenda, do we have any, Mr. Ashcraft?
Mr. Chairman, there is no closed session at the conclusion of the meeting, but there will be one approximately 7 o'clock at your next break.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ashcraft. Opening board comments, Mr. Popowitz?
I have none.
No, sir.
Mr. Eggers? Mr. Seeley?
No, sir.
Mr. Vice Chair?
No, sir.
And I have none. And at this time, it gives us a great pleasure to recognize one of our employees who has been a long-term employee and someone who's retiring and we're going to miss dearly. And at this, if you would, Arlene Mills, would you please come up and meet with the board? Well, Arlene, certainly over the years I've known since I've been here that if I actually wanted something done in the planning department, that I would call you. And I think many, many other people in Caroline County have felt the same way. And we have grown a lot together. As much as you've been at the comprehensive plan, working with Mike Benjamin and the rest of the staff, I think Caroline County has grown in the right direction. And you are a large part of that. And we are truly grateful for all that you have done. And I'd like to present to you this resolution for appreciation of public service of Arlene Mills. Whereas Ms. Arlene Mills will retire on December 1st, 2010, after more than 22 years of service to Caroline County. And whereas during her employment with the Department of Planning and Community Development, she has distinguished herself as a loyal and valued employee and displayed the utmost of integrity and professionalism. Whereas Mrs. Mills has provided a professional, courteous, and friendly atmosphere for the citizens of Caroline County, always helping to address their concerns and solve problems to ensure that they receive the best service possible. And whereas her outstanding efforts and dedication will be sorely missed. Now therefore be resolved, the Caroline County Board of Supervisors expresses its gratitude and appreciation to Ms. Arlene Mills for her devoted and faithful service to the citizens of Caroline County. Be it further resolved that the board congratulates Mrs. Mills on her retirement and extends its best wishes to her and her family for good health and happiness in future years. Adopted 23rd day of November, 2010, Percy Ashcraft, Clerk, Chairman D.M. Roselle, Jr. And again, we are just so grateful again for all the years of service and your dedication.
I've enjoyed all the time that I've worked here. I love working with the citizens. All the employees in my department are like family, and all the other departments, we were all team players. And I'm really going to miss Mike because Mike and I have worked together for 20 years, and it's going to be hard leaving. And I want to thank Mr. Ashcraft for all he's done for the employees, and also thank the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Gentlemen, somebody will move the resolution that we have this evening. Motion made, probably second. All those in favor say aye. 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 All right, unanimous.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Arlene and Ted probably can plaster their walls. This is the second plaque we've given them in the past week for dedication to this county and all that they do for Caroline County and the citizens of Caroline. So we're going to miss them. The Madison District is going to miss you from not living there, and we wish you the very best in your new home and new place.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, next on the agenda, presentations and reports, discussion of the proposed GIS data policy. Mr. Fincham.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, your next item is a continued discussion of the development of the Caroline GIS. Staff initially presented the GIS policy to the board back at your October 12th meeting. And at that time, the board asked staff to come back with some additional information concerning other localities and their policies on sharing GIS data and what was available. In your packet, you have a matrix of the other GWRC localities as well as Hanover County and the different data layers that are available and which data layers are available publicly. It's not quite an apples to apples comparison because there are many different data layers that have been developed by other jurisdictions. And some jurisdictions charge for some of the data layers because they've actually gone out, spent additional public funds to prepare more detailed information. For example, some counties have actually flown topo at a scale of an inch of 2-foot contour intervals versus the standard 10 or 20-foot contours that are available through the Commonwealth of Virginia. So this information reflects only the information that is available publicly on the different GIS systems within these 5 jurisdictions. You will see if you compare that this information, in some cases you'll see floodplains, you'll see 100-year floodplains, you'll see floodways. So that reflects the fact that some of those data layers, there again, more specific information has been developed. They may have different features. For example, we identify historic resources. Other localities, including Spotsylvania, identify historic resources. Some localities had identified local historic sites which weren't on the national or state register. So that's why you have a discrepancy in the different data layers that have been developed by the different localities. And it makes the apples to apples comparison somewhat difficult. But in most cases, information such as zoning, aerial photography, comprehensive plans, community facilities. Much of that information is shared publicly in one form or another by all of the various localities. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions that you or the other board members may have.
Okay, Ms. Pop, would you have questions of Mr. Fincham?
No, sir.
Mr. Akers?
I do not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Seeley?
I have a couple. Mr. Fincham, I noticed that there's a lot of X's under all these different localities. Are these all the public overlays that they allow, or are these all their overlays?
These are public overlays.
So everything that we have here is definitely public?
Yes, sir. For example, if you go to first page, you go to aerial photography, okay? 4 to 5 jurisdictions make the aerial photography available publicly. Hanover County actually charges for a CD for the entire county. If somebody wants to purchase the aerial photography, you can purchase that from them. You know, for a nominal fee. I think it's like $10 for that information. But the other 4 jurisdictions, well, 3 of the other 4 jurisdictions, our GIS data is not available publicly yet. That's what we're working through the board to determine what you want to make public.
So do we have other layers that aren't here that wouldn't be public that aren't marked?
There may be some other layers. For example, utilities. Universally, utility data in terms of your line location, size, hydrants, not hydrants, but line locations and the size of those lines uniformly are not available publicly because of security concerns.
Right.
But hydrant locations, for example, we actually show in our 911 address books to help fire and rescue services locate those facilities in the event of a fire.
Because I know we talked about some of there may be some sensitive ones other than utilities, and these are all the layers that we currently have that you're anticipating to start?
To start, yes, sir.
Just to start?
Just to start. And if the board feels that some of these layers, you're not comfortable making public at this time, then once you make that decision and give us that guidance, we will make those modifications.
And one comes to mind, and I was just the historical locations, and I'm thinking of houses on the National Register that are way off the beaten path that may or may not be occupied. I don't know yet how some folks would feel about that. That's one of the ones, I guess, that draws questions for me.
Yes, sir.
But one that I'd like to talk to some folks about.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fincham.
Mr. Vice Chair?
No, I think I'm in the same boat, Mr. Fincham, as far as removing anything that would be a security concern. Fire stations, fire hydrants, we already have those for fire and rescue, so I'm not sure if I'd want to publicly put those out there. Not that I think it's an actual threat in Caroline right now, but you never know. So why give somebody a chance? That was all I had, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Fincham, are you recommending that what is marked for Carolina, is that what you're recommending that we set up or establish?
Based upon the comments I've heard tonight, Mr. Rozelle, we can certainly eliminate those 3 items that have been referenced. Our fire and rescue station locations, hydrants, as well as historic resources. If you want to make one more check to make sure that there's nothing else on here that you're uncomfortable with going public, that's fine. But if you're comfortable, we can remove those items and go forward with the rest.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Popowitz.
Mr. Fincham, do we have the information on technology zones for our area? Because that's not marked on here.
That is not on here. That's a data layer that would be developed.
Okay.
The technology zones actually came after our contract with Worldview was negotiated. So that's one of the an item that we would look to add in the future.
Okay, thank you.
How about the congressional boundaries and the school district boundaries? Is that did they not drill down far enough to provide that? Caroline County is split up, again, at least two congressional districts.
Right.
And I think it may be well that if that's available, that we put it.
Yes, sir. We can get that added. We're still in a maintenance contract with Worldview, so we can have those items added. So any ideas like that, and we've gone through this list just like you have and identified some that make sense to add.
And the same thing happened. Same thing is true for the House of Delegate, if that is something, because I think we're now split up among 3 House of Delegate members, and
yes,
may
sir.
even be more than that after the census is taking place. I'm not sure. How about the school attendance districts?
We can certainly add that as well. You know, we don't have that data from the school system, but we can get it. If they're comfortable with adding it, we can do that. And what I would suggest is that before we actually add data publicly, that we come back to the board and get your approval to do so.
I need to know how much cost is going to be involved, if there's any additional cost. But again, with the school attendance districts, that may work well for new people coming in, and as well as help the citizens that are here.
Okay, you have enough information, Mr. Fincham, to wrap that up? Try to take care of these security kind of issues?
Yes, sir. We can take care of that.
Okay.
Can you move you want to adopt the policy? Or you want to wait?
As far as the policy, I don't have a real problem with the policy. Now, just the items that we leave out there, I guess, for the public view, we just want to make sure that we protect the citizens as much as possible, not to put anything out there that's going to cause any harm.
Yes, sir.
So that's the main concern. But as far as the policy, does anybody have a problem with the actual policy? Any changes to the policy?
None for me.
Can we accept that as it is presented?
Do you need a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we accept the GIS system policy as presented by staff.
Second.
Motion made and probably second to accept the GIS data policy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same. All right, motion carries. All right.
Okay.
Next item, we've got the discussion of 2011 redistricting process. Mr. Fincham.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in early 2011, along about February 11th, we expect to receive the official census data from the April 1st, 2010 census. Once we receive that data, that will actually kick off the time frame for the county to begin its redistricting process, whereby you evaluate the county's population and reapportion that population for representation by the Board of Supervisors. At the same time we're doing ours, the Commonwealth of Virginia will be doing theirs as part of the Senate and House, and the federal government will be working with them on the congressional apportionment as well. So all the different layers of government will be going through the redistricting process beginning early next year. The redistricting process next year, I think, is compounded by the fact that we have a very compressed time frame in which to complete the redistricting, forward any amended plan to the Department of Justice for pre-clearance, as is required by federal law, in time for any primaries that might be scheduled next year, which I believe is tentatively scheduled for June 14th. DOJ has to approve any plans 60 days in advance of any proposed election, whether it's a primary or not. So basically, we have to have our redistricting plan into the Department of Justice no later than April 14th in order to qualify or meet that 60-day deadline. The last two redistricting processes, the board has actually appointed a Citizens Advisory Committee to assist the board in going through the data, analyzing that data, and making recommendations for the board to consider. The board ultimately had to hold a public hearing on a plan, make any changes prior to that public hearing, and then complete that process. But historically, both in 1991 and 2001, the Board of Supervisors appointed an advisory committee to assist you in analyzing the data and preparing plans for you to consider. 1991 was an interesting process in that prior to that time, Board of Supervisors only had 4 members on the board. As part of 1991 redistricting, the then Board of Supervisors, as part of the process, agreed to create a 5th seat and agreed to create a second minority-majority seat based upon the demographics of the county at that time. In 2001, we repeated that process. There were no significant changes. We already had 5 districts. No additional districts were added. But the direction of the board to the committee was to try to maintain a status quo. We had 5 districts. We had 2 districts which were minority-majority districts. And the committee and the board were successful in retaining the status quo at that time. On page 2, you have a comparison of the population figures from 1991 and 2001 that showed you the population size of the districts, the variations between the high and low districts. And at least in 2001, we were very successful in narrowing the deviation between the high district population and the low district population. In both cases, and I would suggest what will happen again this year, the high growth area of the county, which historically has been the Madison district, we have had to move large populations from that area and disperse those populations amongst the other 4 districts. I would suggest that based upon the population figures that we expect from the census, that issue will be even a bigger issue for us to deal with this year. If you're we're anticipating a population increase of roughly 6,000 people. That's a lot of people to have to move out of one district into the other districts and try to meet all the legal standards that are required of us by Department of Justice.
You're saying 6,000 in just Madison?
6,000 total.
Oh, right, okay.
Most of the growth has been on the west side of the county. So.
But it's not 6,000 that one district?
No, not just in Madison, right. I have included in my memo a brief outline of all the legal standards that will have to be addressed during the redistricting process. I would add that these are also contained in Attachment 3, which is a handout from a redistricting presentation that was given to staff last week up at GWRC. And if the board's interested in additional information, you can go to the Division of Legislative Services website. They have a number of packets there which basically have the same information. But they've given these presentations several times over the last couple of months, and there's a lot of information there on the process and the requirements that have to be met. As you go forward with the redistricting process in 2011, staff would like to point out a couple of items that I think the board should think about as you head into next year and start this process. Again, first and foremost, we have a relatively short time frame. We have basically from mid-February to early April to undertake this entire process, go to public hearing, adopt your ordinance, and send it off to the Justice Department for their review. And under item D, I've kind of outlined a possible time frame for board consideration. Under the legal standards, of which there are a number, I've highlighted 5 that I think will be of particular interest to the board based upon local conditions. One is the non-regression provision of the Voting Rights Act, which basically says a protected interest or special interest shouldn't lose ground from one redistricting process to another. Communities of interest, which may be an issue on the west side of the county. Communities of interest under federal law are not supposed to be split unless there's some rational justification to do so. Lake Landor is an example of a community of interest. You actually have the heritage side, you have the Landor side. You actually have 2 different sides of Lake Landor, but splitting them, Route 639, for example, might be an issue that we have to look at. Not saying we will, but if it came down to figuring out where dividing lines were between the district, splitting that community might be an issue in terms of the community of interest standard. Incumbency, obviously, is a standard to be protected. Precinct considerations. Whenever you're creating new precincts, in 2001 we created a couple of new precincts. There are certain standards that have to be met for identifying precinct locations. They have to be ADA compliant. They have to be, within the boundaries of the precinct being created, unless there are special conditions which require Justice Department approval. Staggered terms is something to be considered by the board. Right now, all 5 board members are elected at the same time. Staggered terms might be something the board wants to consider in terms of continuity from one election to another, or in terms of continuity of representation on the board. The board may also want to consider the number of districts. We went from 4 to 5 in 1991. We have 5 now. Given the fact that we have a large, roughly 6,000 people to reapportion amongst the 5 districts, keeping in mind all of the other legal standards that we have to look at, the board may want to consider looking at some other number to represent residents of the county. 2 options that I've thrown out for you to think about are going to 6 members with 1 at large, or 7 members. Whatever you do, we have 5 now. I think it's important that you keep an odd number for voting purposes on the board. Just for reference, I've also included the 2 district maps, the ones that were created in 1991 as well as 2001, for you to take a look at and review. Some cases, the boundaries of the districts really did not change all that much. Bowling Green's an example. We really didn't have to change the Bowling Green boundaries all that much in 2001. Other districts. For example, Madison had to shrink. Port Royal actually increased. So this is just for comparison purposes for you to take a look at and for you to think about. No action is required tonight, but I just wanted to introduce the board, recognizing that it will be a short time frame, and if the board wants to consider a citizens advisory again, then that's something that needs to be started by the board and completed by the end of January, so that we can have a meeting and get all the appointees familiar with the process. With that, I'll answer any questions that the board may have.
Board members have questions, Mr. Popowitz? Okay, Mr. Akers?
Mike, you talked early on about the growth that's taking place in approximately 6,000 additional people. So what you're saying is in 2000, I think it was like 25,000 people is what the census was saying that we had?
Yeah, the 2000 population was 22,121,
Okay.
which was up roughly 2,900 from the 1990 census.
So you think this is going to come in at about 28, 29,000?
We kind of expect 28,000 plus or minus a couple hundred.
Okay. Yeah, I know that probably the two areas that have grown the greatest is going to be Belmont and Carmel Church area, and then of course Ladysmith Village and Pendleton, and Lake Landau and Lake Caroline in the Madison district. I personally, like the idea of going to 6 set districts with the at-large district, because what bothers me is the fact that, and certainly not taking away anything from the way the Port Royal is represented, Bobby, you do a good job, but that's really a long district. It runs from Port Royal over to the Spotsylvania County line, up near close to Potluck, and it must be 30 miles or more, maybe 35 miles. And I don't know where, if we talk about community of interest, how the community of interest is that much for those two different areas. I also like the idea of staggered terms. I think that is something that is probably long overdue, and this board seriously needs to look at staggered terms in this process rather than delaying it any further. But do you have any ideas as to the number of additional people that are, say, in the Mattaponi district, because that's the other district that's probably grown the largest, and the Madison district, out of the 6,000 people?
No, sir.
You
I mean, like you, we've had Belmont. We've had a lot of growth in that area, the Ladysmith area. We actually won't. The projected date for the receipt of the numbers is February 11th.
I think the last time in 2001 we were tried to even out the numbers as best as we could, but I think then the Madison district probably had 5,400, 5,300, 5,000 people in it at that point.
Yeah, we had to transfer out a significant number.
What was the final number that we say was in Madison?
Page 2. 2001 census, the 2001 plan, the Madison figure was 4,484.
4,484. Okay.
Okay, is all your questions? Mr. Seeley?
None at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Vice Chair?
Mr. Fincham, a couple of things. One is kind of make a point I'd like to make, just to make sure we all understand, and I know you understand, but some of the district irregularities in shape are pretty much due to the requirement of A, trying to balance the numbers, and B, trying to balance the actual majority numbers and those sort of things. So that's part of why some of the districts look like they do. and that was a statement. The other part is kind of half statement, half question, but the state actually does, and I attended a redistricting presentation a few weeks ago myself, and I think the calendar for the state to do theirs was the April timeframe. And what happened 10 years ago is the state actually used our existing districts at that time, which hadn't been changed.
Yes, sir.
So that is why I, in particular, represent Mattapanai, but I had people in the Mattapanai district voting for the 1st Congressional District and also the 7th Congressional District, because that piece of the 7th formerly belonged to Madison. So when we did ours, after they did theirs, we got that kind of problem, and that actually cost the locality more money. So my question, roundabout way, is there any possibility that we can have something close to ready at the time the state is ready, so that our districts will line up a little better?
Ours will be ready. I think we will have the same problem we had 10 years ago, because the boundaries, from what I have read, have already been frozen. So by the time the state, the General Assembly actually goes through the redistricting process, it still will not be completed in time for a 2011 primary or election. So historically what has happened, the following year the General Assembly goes through and cleans up those irregularities.
They never did it, though, in the last 10 years. Or they didn't do it in the last 10 years.
I expect at least for a year we will still have that same problem. So the 2011 elections, I think you will see the same issue that we had last time.
Okay, and that is understandable, although unfortunate. And I guess the other thing that the presentation that I attended said is, just in case the state takes longer than normal, the Board of Elections would have the possibility of moving primary dates out a little further. But that's totally on the state level.
Yes, sir, and as I understand it, I don't think the Board of Elections, and I can check that, I think the General Assembly would have to modify that,
Right.
and it's my understanding that that has not been done yet. That a request or a suggestion was made to do that, which was rejected. So right now, June 14th is still the scheduled primary date.
But we know, I think it was the 80s, it might have been the 80s, when the General Assembly took so long that they actually had to run every year, even though they had 2-year terms, until the federal, the Department of Justice intervened and said, we now accept what you have. So that's just another possibility on the state level. It really has nothing to do with locality. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you, sir.
Okay, it appears that the census data will be here in February, and the board's first action would need to be in January. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And you may want another update at one of your 2 January meetings where we go into this in a little bit more detail. This is good nighttime reading material, but come January, we really need to, if you're going to have a committee, we need to get the committee established. If staff is going to do it, then we need to know that too.
Historically, have we had one member from each district, or can you recall?
2 to 3, I believe. Two for the most part. And then, you may want to have some representatives like the school system, any special groups, Hispanic, African American representatives, something like that. So if there's any interest groups out there, they should be represented on the committee as well, or at least be contacted and encouraged to be involved in the process.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you for the report.
Chairman, you want committee appointments to be placed on the next agenda to begin the board considering those, or you want to wait till January?
We can do it in December.
I like the committee's